On Thursday afternoon, June 12, 2025, life in Parow, a busy suburb of Cape Town, seemed normal. Cars moved steadily along Voortrekker Road, one of the city's busiest streets, filled with shops, businesses, and commuters rushing home. But at the intersection with Giel Basson Drive, everything changed in an instant. A car carrying 55-year-old Andre Naudé and 3 companions was suddenly ambushed. Another vehicle pulled up beside them, and gunmen opened fire, spraying bullets before speeding off into the distance. When the shooting stopped, Naudé laid inside the car. Naudé wasn't just another victim of crime in South Africa. He was a man long known to police and the media as a feared underworld figure, the powerful owner of a security empire, and someone whose name carried weight in Cape Town's criminal world. His death was not random. It was the violent end of one of South Africa's most notorious kingpins. And the story of how it happened is as shocking as it is fascinating. This is the story of how South Africa's underworld kingpin met his end. Andre Naudé's life was always tied to power, fear, and the dark world of Cape Town's nightlife. In the early 1990s, Cape Town's clubs were booming, and Naudé made his entrance as a bouncer. He was tall, strong, and built for the job. In a world where your presence alone could control a crowd, Naudé fit the role perfectly. But Andre wasn't just another heavy at the door. He was smart. He knew being a bouncer wasn't really about checking IDs or breaking up fights. It was about control. The man at the door controlled who got in, who stayed out, and what business went on inside. That meant he controlled the money and the information that flowed through Cape Town's nightlife. Naudé understood this better than most, and he used it to climb quickly through the ranks. He cultivated a persona that was as strategic as it was genuine, described by his own family as a theatrical man who was larger than life. And it showed. He built a reputation not just as muscle, but as a man of style and presence. He even worked as protection for international celebrities, which gave him an air of professionalism and class that separated him from street thugs. This mix of charm and intimidation made him stand out, and soon, he wasn't just guarding the doors, he was running them. The nightclub security industry in Cape Town looked clean on the surface. Officially, it was about keeping partygoers safe, but the truth was far darker. It was the heart of a criminal empire. Clubs were perfect for dealing, money laundering, and extortion. Whoever controlled security at the doors had power over everything inside. And for years, men like Naudé made fortunes from this hidden economy. This world, sometimes called the bouncer mafia, had its roots in South Africa's turbulent years of change in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Many of the men who built it came from boxing gyms, sports clubs, or had served in the military during apartheid. They were tough, disciplined, and hungry for money. They formed private security companies that looked legitimate on paper, but in reality, they were organized crime groups. The way they worked was simple but ruthless. A group would approach a nightclub owner and insist on providing security. The owner had no real choice. If he refused, the club would be vandalized, staff would be or the customers attacked until he gave in. Once the group was in charge, they controlled everything, from who sold to who got paid. Clubs became gold mines for ecstasy and other, and security companies acted as the perfect cover for cleaning the profits. In this space, the police were almost powerless. Corruption was everywhere, and many officers either looked the other way or worked with the gangs. That gave men like Andre Naudé the freedom to act like rulers of their own world. They didn't just bend the law. They created their own rules, taxing businesses, regulating sales, and enforcing justice with violence. Naudé thrived in this world. He wasn't just another criminal. He became a figure of authority in Cape Town's underworld. However, the truth is that Andre Naudé's rise to power didn't happen in a vacuum. It came at a time when Cape Town's underworld was going through one of its biggest shakeups. In 2011, Cyril Bika, the man who had ruled nightclub security for years, was assassinated in a drive-by. Bika's death left a huge gap in the city's criminal hierarchy. Everyone knew someone would try to step into his shoes, and one of the men waiting for that moment was Andre Naudé. Naudé was smart enough to see opportunity in chaos. With Bika gone, he and his associates moved quickly to build their own empire on the foundations of the old one. And this wasn't just about brute force. The nightclub security business was clever because it wore the mask of legitimacy. Security companies had contracts, offices, payrolls, and uniforms. On the surface, it looked legal, an ordinary business. But beneath that thin cover, the real money flowed in from extortion and intimidation. It was the perfect setup for organized crime, legal on paper, criminal in practice. Naudé understood this better than anyone. He transformed the bouncer game into a machine that was nearly untouchable. He had the muscle, the connections, and the know-how to keep the business running in broad daylight while hiding its darker side in the shadows. But he didn't do it alone. His real strength came from an alliance that shook Cape Town to its core. Together with businessman Mark Liffman and alleged gang boss Jerome Donkey Basson, Naudé became part of a trio that dominated the city's night scene. Naudé was the muscle. He ran the doors, controlled the security, and made sure their word carried weight inside Cape Town's clubs. He was hands-on, the man you didn't want showing up at your business if you refused to cooperate. Witnesses in later trials recalled chilling stories of Naudé and Basson storming into clubs, dragging owners outside, and parading them in front of taxis filled with gangsters to prove who was really in charge. Liffman was the brains and the businessman. On the surface, he was a wealthy entrepreneur with interests in real estate and the city's nightlife. To many, he looked like just another flashy businessman, but his name was constantly linked to nightclub protection rackets, the very system that forced club and restaurant owners to pay or suffer the consequences. His money and connections gave the group an air of legitimacy, turning them into something far more sophisticated than an ordinary street gang. Then there was Jerome Donkey Basson. Alleged by police to be the leader of the powerful Sexy Boys gang, Basson brought sheer manpower. His soldiers were loyal, violent, and ready to do whatever was needed to protect their interests. With the Sexy Boys backing him, the Naudé-Liffman-Basson trio had the street-level firepower to intimidate rivals and crush anyone who dared stand in their way. Together, they were untouchable. Naudé's security empire, Liffman's business front, and Basson's army of gangsters created the perfect balance of power. For years, Andre Naudé and his partners, Mark Liffman and Jerome Donkey Basson, ruled Cape Town's nightlife like kings. They had the doors, the muscle, the money, and the fear that kept rivals away. But in the underworld, peace never lasts. Sooner or later, someone always comes along to challenge the throne. That challenger was Nafiz Modak. He wasn't just another gangster looking for a slice of the pie. He was ambitious, calculating, and bold enough to take on the established order head-on. On the surface, Modak was a businessman with interests in property and security. But behind that image, he was putting together his own empire. And when he finally made his move, Cape Town erupted into one of the most brutal turf wars the city had ever seen. The first open clash happened at a property auction in Parow, and it was nothing short of explosive. Modak's family had lost a property, and Naudé, Liffman, and their crew arrived at the auction. The tension snapped. According to Modak, Liffman shoved a gun in his face, and a full-blown brawl broke out in front of stunned onlookers. Naudé himself was caught in the chaos. Reports from that day claim he ran from the fight wearing nothing but flip-flops, and in his rush to escape, he left them behind. Rivals later spread photos of his abandoned sandals, mocking him as if the once untouchable giant had been reduced to a man fleeing barefoot. That moment was the spark that lit the From then on, Modak went on the offensive. His men began storming nightclubs and strip clubs across Cape Town, kicking out Naudé's security teams and taking over their contracts by force. Within months, Modak claimed he controlled 80% of the city's nightclub security business, territory that once belonged to Naudé, Liffman, and Basson. But Modak wasn't only fighting with fists and guns. He also fought with words. In interviews, in courtrooms, and through carefully crafted statements, he painted himself as a reformer, not a gangster. He claimed he was cleaning up Cape Town, accusing Naudé and his allies of turning clubs into drug dens. To the public, he tried to look like a man on a mission, someone fixing a broken system. Behind the scenes, though, bodies were piling up as the war for control grew bloodier by the day. What made Modak truly dangerous was his ability to turn the fight into more than just a gang. He dragged the police into it. Repeatedly, he accused high-ranking officers of siding with his enemies. He singled out Major General Jeremy Veery, one of the most respected detectives in the province, claiming Veery demanded that he split the nightclub racket with Liffman. When Modak refused, he said, Veery warned him, "You're either with us or against us." These allegations shook Cape Town. Suddenly, this wasn't just criminals fighting over doors and drug routes. It was a shadow war that reached deep into the state itself. The public didn't know who to believe. Were Naudé and his crew the real villains? Or was Modak exposing corruption at the highest levels? The battle was being fought on the streets, in courtrooms, and in the media. For Andre Naudé, who had once stood as the imposing giant at the doors of Cape Town's busiest clubs, this was unfamiliar ground. He had spent his life ruling with muscle and fear. But Modak was rewriting the rules of the game. He fought with both guns and narratives, and he wasn't afraid to play dirty. And as the war dragged on, it became clear. The old order was crumbling, and for Andre Naudé, the empire he had built was leading him straight to his bloody end. While Andre Naudé was still locked in a bloody turf war with Nafis Modak, something else happened, something far more dangerous than any nightclub f***. It was a single act of violence, carried out in one of Cape Town's richest suburbs, that would drag Naudé into the crosshairs of the state and seal his fate. The year was 2017. The victim was Brian Weinstein, better known as the Steroid King. Weinstein wasn't just another gangster. He was an international figure wanted by Interpol, a man who had built a fortune smuggling steroids across the world. But instead of hiding in the shadows, Weinstein lived large in Constantia, one of Cape Town's wealthiest neighborhoods. Behind high walls and private security, he lived a life of luxury, surrounded by powerful neighbors who were used to silence and order, not the sound of gunfire. But in August 2017, came crashing into that world. In the early hours of the morning, men slipped past security and stormed Weinstein's house. They found him in bed and executed him on the spot. It was fast, brutal, and cold-blooded. For most people in Cape Town, Weinstein's death was shocking news. But for Andre Naudé, it was more personal. Just a year before, in 2016, he had pointed Weinstein out to a journalist while they sat in a Cape Town restaurant, almost casually, as if marking his place in the underworld's tangled web. That small detail, remembered later, showed that Naudé knew exactly who Weinstein was and where he fit in the criminal puzzle. After the police had no choice but to act. A killing like this wasn't like the shootings in the Cape Flats, which were often ignored or pushed aside. This was Constantia, home to some of South Africa's richest and most powerful families. A man had been murdered in his own bed, and not just any man, a fugitive with international attention. The state could not let it slide. Very quickly, the investigation turned toward Naudé, Mark Liffman, and Jerome Donkey Busson. The trio who once ruled Cape Town's nightlife were suddenly in the dock, accused of orchestrating the hit. All three denied everything, but the pressure was immense. The real mistake wasn't the murder itself, it was where it happened. The rules of the underworld had always been clear. Keep the bloodshed in the flats, out of sight, where the police rarely bothered to dig too deep. But bringing that kind of violence into Constantia was different. It was a declaration, a provocation. The state had to respond with everything it had. And respond it did. Elite units like the Hawks were put on the case, phones were tapped, meetings were monitored. Every word spoken between Naudé and his allies was now evidence waiting to be used in court. For the first time, their empire was under the kind of scrutiny it couldn't withstand. From that moment on, the clock was ticking for Andre Naudé. The nightclub war with Modak had already drained his empire of money, territory, and power. Now, the Steroid King's murder dragged him into a battle he couldn't win, a war with the state itself. And as the years rolled on, the pressure only grew heavier. Court cases piled up, trust began to erode, and paranoia spread through his circle. The once unshakable bond between Naudé, Liffman, and Busson would slowly fracture. The trial for Brian Weinstein's was meant to be the crown jewel in Cape Town's fight against organized crime. Prosecutors had lined up a blockbuster case. Jerome Donkey Busson, Mark Liffman, Andre Naudé, and more than a dozen others all dragged into the dock under the powerful Prevention of Organized Crime Act. Their evidence sounded damning. Wiretaps, surveillance, intercepted phone calls, painting a picture of a criminal network that had finally been cornered. But courtrooms in Cape Town's underworld stories often become something else entirely. A waiting room for The Polka trial was never going to be quick. Endless delays, piles of motions, and legal games meant one thing. The longer it stretched on, the more dangerous it became for those on the inside. Because in a trial like this, your biggest enemy isn't the prosecutor standing across from you. It's the man sitting beside you. Every accused knew the threat of a Section 204 deal. The moment one of them cut a bargain with the state, testifying in exchange for freedom or a lighter sentence, the whole empire could collapse. And in the brutal logic of the Cape Flats underworld, there was only one way to guarantee loyalty: silence a potential witness permanently. The first major blow came in November 2024, when Andre Naudé's longtime business partner and ally, Mark Liffman, was down outside the Garden Route Mall in George. Liffman's wasn't just a headline, it was a warning. If someone of Liffman's stature could be taken out, nobody on that charge sheet was safe. Everyone knew that the next name on the list wasn't a matter of if, but when. And for Andre Naudé, That clock was already ticking. Andre Naudé was a man running out of time, and he knew it. For years, he had lived in the shadows of Cape Town's underworld, part enforcer, part businessman, and part soldier, in a war that never seemed to end. By 2025, the walls were closing in on him from every direction, rival gangs gunning for him, police circling him, and even his own allies disappearing one by one in a game of survival. The danger wasn't a distant idea. It was on his heels. Just days before his partner Mark Liffman was Naudé himself had almost been taken out. He was driving along the Nun near Parow when a car pulled up beside him. The driver pointed a straight at his head. Most men would have frozen, but Naudé wasn't most men. In one swift move, he pulled his own firearm, ready to fire back. The would-be assassin sped away. No fired. But the message couldn't have been louder. Your time is coming. That warning came true on Thursday, June 12, 2025. It was broad daylight on Voortrekker Road in Parow, a stretch of tarmac Naudé had driven countless times before. He wasn't alone. 3 of his friends were with him when another car appeared, gliding into position. In seconds, the air erupted with fire. Bullets tore through the street. By the time the echoes faded, Andre Naudé laid. The life of one of Cape Town's most feared men ended in the same way he had lived: fast, violent, and ruthless. The scene that followed was pure chaos, the kind that only comes when a giant of the underworld falls. Police swarmed the road, sealing it off with blue lights flashing against the asphalt. Members of the anti-gang unit rushed in, treating it like the high-profile assassination it was. Paramedics worked on the wounded. One of Naudé's friends, a 61-year-old, had been but survived. 2 others, miraculously, walked away unharmed. But Naudé was beyond saving. He was 55 years old, and his story had reached its inevitable ending. Word spread quickly, not just through the police radios and news wires, but through the underworld itself. Figures from rival crews and even some of his old associates drifted toward Parow that evening. Some out of curiosity, others to see for themselves that the man they had feared for decades was finally gone. Naudé's was no mystery. He had made too many enemies, left too many bodies in his wake, and held secrets that made him dangerous to everyone, including the men he once called brothers. The failed hit on the Nun had been the rehearsal. The ambush on Voortrekker Road was the final act. For the courts, his murder created a bizarre twist. Alongside Liffman, Naudé had been a key figure in the trial over the Brian Steroid King Weinstein. Now, both men were The prosecutors were left holding wiretaps and evidence against ghosts, defendants who could no longer stand trial or defend themselves. It wasn't the law that was dismantling the state's case. It was bullets. In the end, Andre Naudé's fall wasn't shocking. It was predictable, maybe even inevitable. He had lived by the built his world on fear and violence, and in Cape Town's underworld, there was only one way that story ever ends. His created the kind of power vacuum that history has shown is never left empty. The so-called kings were gone, but the kingdom was still there. The rackets, the extortion money. Someone had to take it. And when power is up for grabs, the streets don't stay quiet for long. Already, reports began to surface that the big gangs, the ones that once answered to men like Naudé, were losing control. The notorious 28s, once a dominant force, suddenly looked vulnerable as smaller factions and ambitious lieutenants sensed opportunity. Defections, betrayals, and turf wars followed, promising a free-for-all. Naudé's wasn't the end of Cape Town's underworld story. If anything, it was the start of a new, more dangerous chapter. His legacy is not one of peace, but of a city caught in an endless cycle of violence, where every fallen king only makes way for the next pretender.